those who just joined us. I'm going to wait just another moment to let a few more people enter the meeting. I know our slide, we probably should not have that join promptly at 6:30 since I always want to give people an extra minute or so. But I do see lots of people trickling in through the waiting room, so I just want to give them a moment. In the meantime, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, we would appreciate that. We'd love to know who's with us tonight. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please post those in the chat as we'll compile those for a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Phil, you cracked me up with your introduction.
Me too.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. Thank you so much for taking the evening to spend with us. We really appreciate you being here. If you just joined us, as I've said before, and I apologize to those who joined a little bit early, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And if you have questions during the presentation, please put those in the chat as we will be compiling those questions for a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. This meeting is recorded, so please take note of that. We will always post the recordings of the meetings as well as the PowerPoint from the presentation to our website. So if you happen to want to refresh your memory, or if you want to go back to Bruce's amazing part 1 about unconventional water resources in New Mexico, that is posted on our website, and it's a really good hand in hand with tonight's presentation. I would like to do the land acknowledgement now. The Water Advocates' main activism areas are located on the traditional homelands of the Southern Tila, pueblos of Cochiti, Santo Domingo, San Felipe, Santa Ana, Sandia, and Isleta, the original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache. Since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize that. Oh, and now I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Thomson, who is here with us tonight to present on our water resources. And as I said, he did a fabulous part 1 back in May. So if you missed that, please go check it out. It's posted on our website, and it's a really good hand in hand with what he's going to present tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to our fabulous presenter, Bruce.
Thank you, Brittany. It's truly an honor to be invited to do this. And at the same time, I'm looking at people as they log in, and I've got so many good friends in the audience, and I hope I don't disappoint you. Let me just quickly introduce myself. I've been at UNM for since the late Pleistocene. I think it's 46 and a half years, something like that. I started when I was 12. My degree and my expertise was always environmental engineering, a lot of water chemistry, water treatment, wastewater treatment, things like that. And then 16 years ago, I took over as director of UNM's water resource program. And that kind of, I won't say derailed my career, but it changed my area of interest, or expanded it from just strictly environmental engineering to water resources. And one of the first things I did, I worked with David Brookshire, professor of economics, and Paul Matthews, who's a professor and chair of geography. And we put together a book. I say they put together a book. I wrote a chapter on water resources. And so this talk tonight is kind of an evolution. I've given it a number of times, and every time I do it, I spend quite a bit of time modifying it just so I don't get bored. So some of you may have seen a version of this before, but hopefully there's new material and it will give you some things to think about. So with that, I'm going to try and share my screen. And here's the presentation, share. And so there we go. Can everybody see it? John, Holly, nod your head. Can you see that?
Looks good, Bruce.
He's waving at me. So again, quantities, constraints, and challenges. That's the topic. And I whenever I talk about water, I want to emphasize the point that water and air are unique. There are no alternatives. There are alternatives for energy. There are alternatives for most materials. There's many alternatives for different metals depending on what we're looking for. But for water and air, without them, life doesn't exist. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the summary of the water resources, quantities and constraints, some of the constraints that complicate management of this resource. And then I'm kind of going out a little bit on a limb and offering some suggestions for addressing near-term challenges. And by near-term, I'm talking about 10, 20 years. So we'll move right along. I think I used this same slide in my last talk. The idea is that water resources in New Mexico are based on consumptive use, where consumptive use is the difference between withdrawal and return flows. And the example I use is the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority, which withdraws 100,000 acre feet. Acre feet is a third of a million gallons. They withdraw 100,000 acre feet. It's a combination of surface water and groundwater, depending on the time of the year. And then at the the Southside Water Reclamation Plant, they discharge 60,000 acre feet. So the consumptive use is 100,000 minus 60,000. City of Albuquerque, or the urban areas, consumptive use is 40,000 acre feet. So in principle, that's what determines the amount of water rights we have to hold in order to meet the needs of the urban area. River basins of Albuquerque, of New Mexico rather, of course, the biggest one is the Rio Grande. It's 2/3 of the population. The other one is Texas, is the Pecos, which again discharges to Texas down south of Carlsbad. The other watersheds are pretty small. The upper Colorado has a lot of water, but that originates mostly out of the state and passes on through to the Colorado River. So let's talk about the statewide water resources. And every 5 years, the Office of the State Engineer publishes a report called Water Use by Categories. I believe that's the title. I've got the exact reference and a citation and a website, but this is done every 5 years, and we're overdue for one now. What this report totalizes is withdrawals. They don't do consumptive use. And you can see that our total withdrawals, surface and groundwater, is 3.1 million acre feet. Half of it's surface water, half of it's groundwater. And over in the lower right-hand corner, I've got the percent of withdrawals which are groundwater, and you get over on the east side, there's very little surface water, so everything's groundwater. That's the yellow bar. In the middle Rio Grande, it's a little bit, I think it's 40% groundwater, 60% surface water. But again, and I think this is not a surprise to anybody, is that about 3/4 of the withdrawals, not consumptive use, withdrawals is groundwater, is agriculture. I'm having a hard time tonight. I need a beer. Okay, so let's look at the middle Rio Grande. Middle Rio Grande is usually defined as the stretch of the river between Cochiti Lake, which is here just downstream from Ottawee Gauge, and Elephant Butte. That's Yeah, it's the Middle Rio Grande, and we're all familiar with that. Ottawa gauge is an important um, gauge because that the flows at that gauge, that's where highway crosses the Rio Grande and goes up the hill to Los Alamos. I believe it's on San Ildefonso Pueblo land. So the flows at Ottawa determine how much has to be delivered to the lower Rio Grande, abbreviated frequently as LRG, and Texas. So the lower Rio Grande is everything below Elephant Butte to the state line, and then Texas is farther south. So the 2 points, Ottawa gauge is the index gauge, and the delivery point is the spillway at Elephant Butte. So we talked about withdrawals, and this is the withdrawals in the Middle Rio Grande. Again, about 3/4 is for irrigated ag and livestock. But about 14 years ago, the Middle Rio Grande Water Assembly, which has evolved to become the Water Advocates, sponsored a study. No money was associated with it, and I led a group along with Jesse Roach, who at the time was at Sandia National Labs. Jesse is now the water utility manager at the city of Santa Fe. And Jesse had developed a dynamic simulation model. It's called ErgSim. It was developed at Sandia, Upper Rio Grande simulation model. And whereas the state engineer and their water use by categories does not report consumptive use, we used the Sandia model to calculate consumptive use. And that's down here in the lower right-hand corner. And this is over the period of 2008 to 2012. In 2008, then the city of Albuquerque, now the ABCWUA, started their surface water treatment plant, started taking water out of the river. And so in that 4 years, 2008 to 2012, agricultural evapotranspiration, the consumptive use basically, was 49%. Riparian ET, the evapotranspiration from the cottonwoods and the salt cedars and all the vegetation immediately adjacent to the river, was about 23% of the total. Lake and stream evaporation was about 20%, 19%, according to this. And M&I, municipal and industrial consumptive use, was about 10%. Okay, so round numbers, 50% ag ET, 25% riparian, 20% for lake and stream evaporation. Most of that, of course, is in Elephant Butte, and then municipal industrial is about 10%. So this is, to the best of my knowledge, this is the best estimate of the consumptive use in the Middle Rio Grande. And I offered this slide. This is one of my favorites. I've recently updated the data. It summarizes the average flow at certain locations. So, the San Juan, the Middle Rio Grande at Ottawa Bridge is just a little bit less than 1 million acre feet. Remember, city of Albuquerque, the urban Albuquerque is 40,000 acre feet. So, we're somewhere around 4 or 5% of the average annual flow. The problem is that 1 year out of 10, it's about half of that. It's 532 acre feet per year, 532,000 acre feet. But it gives you some perspective. So there are two numbers I would suggest you try and remember. One is that the annual flow at Ottawa is about 1 million acre feet, and the consumptive use by urban Albuquerque is 40,000 acre feet. It's squirrely units. Maybe I've said this before. I've said it many times. When I was an undergraduate engineering student, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, our professors all told us, "Oh, you don't need to learn American units, the SI units, gallons, feet, miles." He says, "because in 5 years, we will all be using the metric system." And those lying sons of guns. Anyhow, so here's the Rio Grande at Ottawa. Down here, I put the San Juan Chama. the San Juan River, rather, at Four Corners, the Canadian River. These are, again, the San Juan River mostly originates in southern Colorado, and very little of it is used in New Mexico. Okay, here's the test question, and it's my favorite test question of all times. Name the three biggest tributaries to the Rio Grande. And everybody thinks automatically, oh yeah, the Chama River. The second one, Caneos, and the third is the Southside Water Reclamation Plant. So here, digest that a little bit. The Rio Chama, its annual average flow is 400,000 acre feet, 10 times what the city uses. The Caneos, 65,000 acre feet, and the the Southside Water Reclamation Plant is 60,000 acre feet. It's bigger than the Red River. And in fact, the actual flows over the last 10 years of the Red River, the average flows have been decreasing a little bit, whereas the average flows at the Southside Water Reclamation Plant have been increasing ever so slightly. So, we talked about in May, we talked about wastewater reuse. And I think I presented this statistic, this table then. And the idea is that the fact that the Southside Water Reclamation Plant is the third biggest tributary has significance because it constitutes a major fraction of the flow downstream from Albuquerque, which helps satisfy our compacts deliveries to Texas and the lower Rio Grande. The other thing is that this is at many times of the year. Last year, the river went dry between the diversion up by Alameda Bridge and the wastewater treatment discharge. And so this is an important source of environmental flows to keep the silvery minnow, keep a resident population of silvery minnows. So the concept of wastewater return flows is really important, both from a regulatory perspective. It's used in calculating the consumptive use, but also it's got environmental consequences as well as compact delivery consequences. Rivers are where we spread the lakes in the west are where we spread the water out to dry, and we do a really good job. At Elephant Butte, the average pan evaporation is 10 feet per year, whereas up near the border at Heron Lake, which is up by Tierra Amarillo, it's 1/3 that. So in a perfect world, we'd store all of our water upstream in deep lakes where we had low evaporation, but that's not the way we've got our infrastructure set up. You talk about groundwater depletion, and there's a map and there's a citation. I'm not going to try and go through this, but you can see over there on the eastern plains, there is a lot of depletion. I think this is a better illustration. You can see Estancia Basin, the declines are on the order of 2 feet per year. The Southern Jornada, north and east of Las Cruces, 3.5 feet per year. The Members Basin down south of Silver City's 2.2 feet per year. East Central over by Clayton, 2 feet per year. Curry County, which is Clovis, Portales, Roosevelt County is just north. We're talking about close to 2 feet per year in the Southern High Plains. Groundwater is a diminishing resource all around the state. The one place where groundwater, we seem to be in pretty close balance is the Middle Rio Grande, because we're taking water out of the San Juan Chamo River water that's providing 70% of the surface water for the Albuquerque Basin. So the Middle Rio Grande is pretty close to compliance based on the modeling that Jesse Roach and I and some others have done. San Juan Chama project, I suspect most folks are familiar with it. The idea is that we're taking water out of 3 tributaries to the San Juan Chama in southern Colorado, running it through a system of tunnels, 26 miles of tunnels, dump it into a tributary to the Chama, goes into Heron, then El Vado and Abiquiu, and then down the Rio Grande. And it's interesting. It was, first proposed almost 100 years ago. That was back in the days, the 30s, 40s, and 50s, were in the days of big, grandiose river water diversion projects like Hoover Dam and places like that. Authorized in 62, diversions began in 1971. Total cost was about $500 million, and it's for almost 100,000 acre feet. Picture of the Azotea Tunnel, and I want to note there's a sill there that backs up the water so the water can be diverted into the tunnel. And if you notice, there's no water going over top that sill. So there's very little water downstream. It's one of the consequences. The water flows down the Chama. We take it out at the Bakeki open space. On the right, you just barely see on this picture, is Alameda Bridge. Downstream, just a couple hundred yards, is Paseo del Norte Bridge. Water is withdrawn through some very fine mesh screens so that we don't capture any Rio Grande silvery minnows or even their eggs. Very fine mesh screens. It goes to this pump structure. It's an open space, and the North Valley residents were concerned about the aesthetic impact of a big old concrete building, like most of our pump stations are. So the authority, or the city at the time, took some architectural, or included some architectural characteristics, and it looks like an old Spanish church, and I call it the Church of the Holy Pump Structure. It's pumped up to a treatment plant. The treatment plant is inside these large buildings. There is a pre-sedimentation basin. Each of those basins is roughly 1 day of supply. Maybe it's 2 days of supply. It's just a couple days of supply. And they're called pre-sed basins because it allows the sediment. You can see how muddy and turbid the river is. It allows much of the sediment to settle out. Even then, the authority still has a problem with suspended solids. And here's the diversion of the water. Albuquerque gets its 96,000 acre feet. Albuquerque gets half of it, and it goes on down. City of Santa Fe gets 5,600 acre feet, so forth, all the way down. At the same time, the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District gets 21,000 acre feet. So this is a really, really important source of water for the Middle Rio Grande, and it's hard to imagine what we would do if we didn't have it. And congratulations to our forefathers for having the foresight to invest in this project. It's pretty remarkable. As I said, surface water is roughly 70% of supply. Depends on the year, depends on time of year. In years when there's a lot of flow in the Rio Grande, the surface water may constitute 75% or more. During years of drought, maybe surface water is 50% or even less. And one of the remarkable accomplishments of urban dwellers is that we have reduced our per capita use from 250 gallons per person per day, 250 gallons per capita per day, to 125 gallons per capita per day. So that's pretty remarkable. And it was all done voluntarily. There were incentives, certainly. The authority gave me, I've forgotten, $50 to buy this rain barrel that cost me $250. But there were incentives and inducements. But this has all been done without mandatory conservation. So congratulations to us. Should be recognized. I heard a presentation this morning by Jesse Roach, who again is the utility manager for the city of Santa Fe. They're down around 90 gallons per person per day. You know, things are a little different in Santa Fe. It's a little wetter, so there's a little bit less pressure by residents to use that water for outdoor irrigation. There's less evaporation and so forth. But that's a good target, I think. I think that's achievable. Somewhere around 100 gallons per person per day is achievable in the urban area, and we'll see if we can get there. Water law and administration, this is one of the constraints, and I suspect most of us are familiar with that. It's established in the Constitution. Here's my copy of the Constitution. I carry it next to my heart. Well, at least it's on my desk. Priority appropriation means the oldest water rights have a preference in times of drought. So in principle, somewhere there's a big long list the date that that water right was perfected, the date associated with the water right, and the volume associated with that right. And so in times of drought, they start at the bottom of the list, the most recent water rights, and those guys are cut off completely. There is no shortage sharing. And so it made sense in 1907 when the economy of the state was based on agriculture and mining and timber, but maybe it doesn't make sense now. Anyhow, but that's what we have to live with. And yeah, the consequences, there's no incentive to conserve. So if I've got an old water right, a senior water right, and it's times of drought, nothing to stop me from pumping the heck out of that resource. Years ago, I was down in Las Cruces, hot summer day, and there was a developer down there, and he was pumping the heck out of his wells to irrigate a golf course. And he had to use it or lose it, and that was his interpretation. And that, in fact, is the case. There are provisions in principle, although I think they're seldom used, that if someone doesn't use their water right for a certain period of time, and we're talking about a decade or more, the water right can be forfeited to the state. So this is the water resource challenge as a Venn diagram. This is in the middle Rio Grande. Ag has roughly 50% of the total consumptive use, and they've got senior rights. M&I, municipality and industrial, has about 9%, 10%, and they are junior rights. So in times of drought, in principle, ag could, put a call on the river, and the urban dwellers would be required to relinquish their use during the drought. But the other challenge is that we talked about this. Riparian evapotranspiration and lake and river evaporation constitute somewhere around 40% of the total consumptive use, and they have no water rights. And so this is a real difficult management challenge for the water managers, whether it's the conservancy district or the urban and industrial users. This is a difficult issue, and of course, we talk about bosque restoration. Well, 100 years ago, the bosque did not exist. It was a mile-wide sand-bottom channel with scrubby little cottonwood trees that washed away every 10 years when they had a big flood. So this is a challenge. Okay, so water issues facing the Middle Rio Grande. The one that I think everybody's familiar with is climate change. And there is a wonderful recent report. There's a picture of it down there. And and rather than try and copy this web address, just look up uh, Dunbar Water Resources of New Mexico, and you'll find it real quickly. It's a report published by the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources. Um, it was written by some of the smartest water managers in the state, edited by um, Amelia Dunbar, who was at the time the state geologist. She's since retired and is fixing to go to Antarctica. That's where I'd go if I retired. Dave Dubois is a state climatologist. Dave Gutzler was a recently retired climatologist. And based on my experience, Dave Gutzler is the smartest water guy in the state. But they published this. And so these are the projections, this upper right-hand corner, the projections from the GCMs, the global climate models of temperature over the next 70 or 80 years. The orange line are actual measured statewide average temperatures. And you can see, that back about 1985, this temperature started climbing. It's consistent. The magnitude of the increase is consistent with what is projected by the general global climate models. Down in the lower right-hand corner are 5-year average temperature. Well, again, going back to the 1930s. And as I said earlier, about 1985, the temperature started to go up. So, that is consistent with the GCMs. The biggest uncertainty is precipitation, which is the blue line down here and the blue line over there. Very wide uncertainty in the models, the atmospheric models, about precipitation. But it looks, if you take the mean of these models, precipitation is going to be flat. And to date, that seems to be consistent, over the last, basically the last 100 years. I want to make a point. General circulation models or global climate models do not predict individual storms. There is some speculation that extreme precipitation events may increase, although there's no consensus about whether or not that will happen. New Mexico's got a long history of drought. Sometimes I facetiously say, we're living in a very dry state. We're always short of water. So what's a drought? It's just a little bit drier next year than it was the previous year or something like that. But this is something that Dave Gutzler put together, and he tries to correlate it to some of the notable historic events. And, was Spanish colonization, was that a result of a dry epoch? No, I don't think so. Colorado River over allocation, it's interesting to look at this and speculate. But the second issue, so the first issue that I want to talk about was climate change. The second issue is the compact. And by issue, I mean a constraint that water managers have to live with. And we talked about Ottawa Bridge, Ottawa Gauge. So on the x-axis this describes the allocation of water between the middle Rio Grande and the lower Rio Grande in Texas. And it's based on the flow at Ottawa. So in an average year, when we have just very close to 1 million acre feet, the middle Rio Grande gets to keep about 40% of that, 400,000 acre feet. The rest of it, the 600,000, goes to the lower Rio Grande and Texas. Okay, so again, here's the index gauge. On the left is the distribution of the flows. Texas believes that they have been they've been the victim of underdelivery of water due to pumping, groundwater pumping in the lower Rio Grande. Doesn't make it, because of all the pumping, it draws the water down. And so surface water does not make it all the way, or their full share does not make it all the way to the Texas line. So they have been, they filed suit about 10 years ago in the Supreme Court, and that's working its way through. But one of the things, this is kind of discouraging. If you look at the index flows, these are the flows at Ottawa. There's about and again, you can see the extreme variability, but there's about a 25% decrease since 1985. Gee, 1985 was when we started seeing increasing temperatures and statewide average temperatures. So is there a correlation? I suspect so. But this yeah, that's pretty bad. This is the volume at Elephant Butte. Here's 1985 to 2000 was a very, very wet 15 years, and Elephant Butte filled up. And ever since then, it's now just barely a mud hole. But again, and that has complex consequences that I don't want to go into. But the fact that there is so little water in Elephant Butte has impacts on how we manage water upstream, and particularly water in the San Juan Chama, in the Chama River. Domestic wells, this is something that has been much concern to the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority. I'm not so sure, but the idea is that domestic wells don't require a water right. All you have to do is file a permit to drill, and there are something like, and each one comes with a permit to use 1 acre foot of water per year, which is 3 or 4 times what I use as an urban dweller. In principle, there are 137,000 of these. In practice, there's probably closer to 200,000 because an awful lot of them, I suspect, no one ever filed a permit and the wells were drilled illegally. But anyhow, so in principle, there is a lot of water being used by folks on their private domestic wells. I'm not sure that's possible to quantify, but that's a big concern because we're talking about very large impacts on the river, the Rio Grande in particular, 36,000 acre feet. And recall what the total consumptive use by urban Albuquerque, 40,000 acre feet. So it's the same order of magnitude. And again, the water authority is really concerned about this. Well, I don't know how we're ever going to deal with that. Native American water rights. We talked about who was here first. Native American water rights for federally recognized reservations, and I'm using that term carefully, for Native American reservations. They have the oldest priority. So they predate the water uses by the European conquerors. And they are entitled to practicably irrigable acreage, PIA. Remember, this was in 1908. Technology since 1908 is really different. So tell me what practical is. Up south of Farmington, the Navajo Irrigation Project, NIP, has center pivot irrigation. I don't think they had center pivot irrigation in 1908. So, what's the definition of PIA for in light of new technologies? It is a tough nut to crack, but it's not too important for most of New Mexico because we're not talking about reservations. We're talking about pueblos that hold Aboriginal rights under the original land grant status. So the 19 pueblos, they were created by grants from the King of Spain or from Mexico. And so this is, the full employment for the historians to go back and read these ancient documents if they can find them and determine what is the magnitude of their water rights. Regardless, everybody recognizes there's a lot of uncertainty and reluctance to take this to the courts, because this the Supreme Court has demonstrated time and time again on water issues. You take it to the court, you got 9 people up there, they're not water experts, and it's just a coin toss. So there's increasing willingness to negotiate and resolve it. And there are 19 pueblos. We've negotiated successfully with 5 of them, and with the Navajo tribe, the Navajo Nation. They're expensive. And I want to note that this water doesn't involve money going directly to the Pueblo. What happens is that in all of the settlements that I'm familiar with, the feds and to some extent the state builds infrastructure to provide the Pueblos with a secure supply of water in exchange for settling and making an agreement on what the water rights are. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. If you go north of Santa Fe, the 4 pueblos up there, that's the Amot case. They have settled, and the Bureau of Reclamation is in the process of building a very nice water distribution system to provide potable water, secure water source to residents of those 4 pueblos. But it's expensive because they're widely distributed. So you got to run miles and miles of pipes. You got to construct a treatment plant and everything else. Okay. Back in the 80s and 90s, the state engineer was granting rights to permission rather, to a couple of rapidly growing communities, Rio Rancho being number 1, with they're sometimes called development rights. They were given permission to put in wells and pump water with the expectation that at some point in the future, these communities would acquire water rights when their drawdown, when the cone of depression, so that's what's illustrated here in the lower right-hand corner, when the cone of depression started to impact surface water. And so the 2 examples I'm most familiar with are Rio Rancho has to acquire 24,000 acre feet of water rights to satisfy their impact on the river, their ultimate impact. And Intel has got to acquire 3,200, and Intel in over 20 years has only managed to acquire less than 1,000 acre feet. I haven't updated this, but yeah, it's hard to find that water. The only source of water in the Middle Rio Grande is irrigated ag. So this statement down here that all the irrigation water, including water used by the Pueblos, must be reallocated to public supply to satisfying existing permits. Sometimes they call it buy to dry or something like that, or drying the browning of the Middle Rio Grande. It's pretty bleak. Price of water, I don't know what water goes for. Lee Brown is the economist at UNM. 12, 13 years ago, gave this plot. I don't know how he found it, but I work with the local flood control authority, AMAFCA, and we had water rights appraised at $20,000 per acre foot. One of my students a year ago had some property in the Mesilla Valley, south of Las Cruces a little ways, and he was quoted a price of $50,000 per acre foot in the lower Rio Grande. So, it's really, really expensive. One of the challenges is that the price of water is not disclosed. It's proprietary, and so I don't know how appraisals are done for this kind of thing. But issue number 7, remember this is a list of issues that are affecting the Middle Rio Grande. Environmental flows. And the idea is that the state water law never recognized water rights for the environment. And we talk about priority administration. Who was here first? And everybody always says, oh, the Native Americans were here first. Well, actually, they weren't. According to Federal Endangered Species Act, the endangered species were here first. And so they have priority when they're supposed to keep water in the river for their successful survival. And this is the inflatable dam that the authority has just downstream from Alameda Bridge. They can raise and lower this dam depending on whether or not they need to divert water from the river and pump it up to the San Juan Chama treatment plant. And of course, it's one of my favorite jokes is, what did the fish say when it bumped into a piece of concrete? Damn. Sorry. But there are issues besides endangered species, or besides just the quantity of water. It's when the water is delivered, the quality of the water. Apparently the silvery minnow gets really turned on and spawns depending on the flow and the turbidity of the water. And of course, when you have a structure in the water, like a diversion dam at Santa Casia or at Isleta, the fish, this little 2-inch long fish, it can't make it back upstream. So the structures in the river have a huge impact on the survival of the fish. There are environmental issues besides ESA, the channelization of the river. And again, I was talking about, this is a picture from the Conservancy District. It was about 100 years ago. You can see the bosque, or rather the lack of bosque. There are no trees. It's a mile-wide sand bottom channel, and now it's 600 feet wide with a very, very dense cottonwood forest on either side. It's channelized. You can see that this is down by Los Lunas. Here is the Isleta diversion. You can see that most of the water goes to the left, to the east, or to the west. Very little water goes past the diversion dam. So channelization of the river, the fish evolved to live in a river. It looked like the picture on the lower right-hand side, not a 600-foot wide channel. There's riparian ET losses. We talked about that. Well, I've forgotten what the number was, something on the order of 20%. Bosque fires every year. Usually it's in May and June, our driest months. We have a couple of bosque fires. And then the diversion dams. We talked, there's our diversion dam. Fish cannot migrate above that. And that's been the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation has spent 20 years looking for ways to deal with these dams. And one of them is to have little fish ladders like they do. And I just have this image in my mind of these little fish ladders with, 2-inch steps and the fish jumping up those little 2-inch steps. And sorry. Population growth. Everybody is concerned about population growth, but in both Albuquerque and Santa Fe, we've been able to decrease our consumptive use and, in fact, decrease the diversions. So if you look at this graph, this is our total diversions. And in 1995, our total diversions, this was all groundwater, of course, total diversions were 120,000 acre feet. By 2015, we're down around 100,000 acre feet. And you can see the blue is groundwater and the white is surface water. And to the point where now somewhere around 2/3 of our water. 70% of our water on an average basis is from the river. So, but the in that almost 30 years since 1995, the city has grown by 30%, but our consumptive use has declined by 30%, and our per capita use has declined by 50%. We've been so successful with this that this authority has discontinued its purchase of new water rights. Santa Fe is equally successful. They are still purchasing water rights if they can find them, but it's not critical. Yeah. Okay, so this is the famous or infamous Thomson train wreck hypothesis. I submit that there are 8 trains with a slow motion collision of all these factors that affect our ability to manage our resource. So first of all is climate change. Not only are we going to have 25% less water in the river, but it's going to be a longer growing season, warmer, so therefore there's more evapotranspiration. So we're going to need more water for both our urban use as well as our agriculture use. We've got the compact delivery. That's a constraint. We've got to provide water to Texas, the lower Rio Grande in Texas. We've got these domestic wells. We've got to satisfy our Native American water rights. We need to negotiate with the Pueblos, and that cannot happen too soon. We need the communities that are facing don't have the water rights to satisfy their impact on the river, Rio Rancho, Union Ranch, and Intel. They need to come up with water rights to satisfy their withdrawal permits. The price of water just makes everything expensive. We've got ESA and environmental flows, and then population growth. I think population growth, at least in the near term, the next 10, 20 years, is not nearly the crisis. But these trains are all coming together slowly, and we're starting to see disputes about these, most notably the Texas v. New Mexico lawsuit before the Supremes on under delivery of water to Texas. So I've got some ideas, and I'm going out on a limb here, but what are they going to do? Fire me? So I suggest conservation is going to be an important part of our future, and I took this graph from the Water Authority's Water 2120, and I want to congratulate the Water Authority. And there are not many utilities of any kind that do 100-year plans, but the Water Authority's done a 100-year plan. Santa Fe's done an 80-year plan, so their title of their plan is Water 2100. But we need to be looking way down the road. So conservation is great. The problem is it works for municipal supplies because the authority or Santa Fe or whoever, they have water rights that they have to live within, and they can provide incentives for residents to conserve water. But if I'm a farmer in the Eastern Plains and I've got a old 1907 water right, there is no incentive for me to conserve. There's no incentive for me to conserve. I use it or lose it. So conservation works great for municipal. We need to figure out mechanisms to encourage ag to conserve. And I'll come back to that here in just a minute. Yeah. So this is one option, and I think we should charge for water use. Right now, water is free. You can put in a well and pump it. You don't have to pay a dime to the state, but the state owns it. So EBID, the Elephant Butte Irrigation District, they charge for water, but they're charging a delivery fee. The Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, they charge a delivery fee, but as a water right holder, you don't have to pay a dime to the state. And I contrast that to grazing fees on public land. It's a reusable, it's a renewable resource. If I graze a cow on state land, I pay a grazing fee. Why is water free and grazing is not? If we did charge for water, there would be an incentive to conserve. It would generate revenue that can be used for water projects. And I'm suggesting an idea. If we charge $50 per acre foot for municipal and industrial use, that'll generate $16 million per year, and it'll cost me as a residential consumer $1 a month. The very modest increase in my rate bill and my water rate. If we charge irrigated ag $5 per acre foot, it's going to cost something like, it'll add 20 cents to the cost of a bale of hay. It's a very, very modest increase, but it generates almost $30 million that can be used for infrastructure, for planning, for conservation mechanisms and things like that. And it provides an incentive for the farmer to conserve his water. Facilitate water transfers through markets. And here's two examples. One is the EBID's depletion reduction offset program, the DROP program, where the municipal and industrial users pay farmers to fallow their land. And my recollection was, and Phil King's going to correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, but the farmer can fallow up to 20% of his land. In exchange, he'll sell that water to the M&I users. Farmers do not lose their water right. It offsets impacts of groundwater use and helps with delivery of water to Texas. And it maintains a viable agricultural production industry in the lower Rio Grande. We don't want to fallow everything because there are economies of scale in agriculture. We need markets. We need the food processing and such. The other example I submit is the water supply for Clovis, New Mexico. Out there, static groundwater levels are dropping 1.125 to 1.75 feet per year. 76 wells in 2023 provide less water than 28 wells provided in 2000. Clovis privatized their water utility a number of years ago to a company called EPCOR. And EPCOR is buying water from the farmers. And they did a reverse Dutch auction where they said, Clovis wants to buy 2,000 acre feet. Who's going to sell it to us? And they went to so the farmers bid, and they were bidding low. Who was going to provide the water to the community at the lowest price? Again, the farmer retains the water right. EPCOR provides the water to the city, and to the best of my knowledge, this is working pretty well. The farmers can make more money selling water to the community than they can doing farming. It's a lot less work. Don't have to pay for diesel and tractor repairs and all that stuff. But at the same time, they retain their water rights. So that's option 3. Option 4 is infrastructure. And this is what we've been doing the last couple of years. A lot of water infrastructure bills have been proposed before the legislature. I maintain that with few exceptions, infrastructure does not really increase the water supplies. Sure, it improves measurement, our understanding of the resource. What are the flows? What are the uses? What is runoff? It's the Water Data Initiative that the folks at the Bureau of Geology are doing so wonderfully. It creates, infrastructure can create water storage to provide a stable supply. So, we can do underground storage and recovery, ASR, aquifer storage and recovery. We can allow increased storage in the reservoirs. We can improve delivery. We can line our canals to reduce the losses. So the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District is, I think, in the process of developing a plan to line the Highline Canal. But when you line those canals, you stop the leaks, and that's a recharge of shallow groundwater. And that's some work that Sam Fernald did up in northern New Mexico 10, 15 years ago. You know, the acequia system is an important component of the water budget. And then we can repair and improve our water and wastewater treatment plants. You know, there these communities that are running out of water. Cloudcroft is a notable example. Part of the reason they're out of water is because they have so darn many leaks in their pipes, and that's expensive. Fixing pipes is expensive. So that's option 4. Unconventional sources of water. This was a subject of my May talk. Wastewater reuse. You can do it if you've got sufficient water rights. You've got to, because you're going to reduce the return flow credits, and so that's going to impact your water rights. So if you've got the water rights, you can do wastewater reuse. And the city of Santa Fe is implementing this right now because they do have return flow credits. Most communities, certainly the large communities, do not have return flow credits. Stormwater capture, you know, the problem there, it's expensive and so forth. But again, stormwater, once it leaves your property, belongs to the state. So you, in order to capture that water and use it, you've got to have a water right. Brackish groundwater. I talked about this. It's not being recharged, so it's not a sustainable source of supply. And the example I use is Western Rio Rancho out in Sandoval County. They wanted to develop brackish groundwater, deep brackish groundwater for a community that would eventually have 300,000 residents. And they did a pump test and a blah, 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 blah. And based on their pump test, they determined that an aquifer of 2,000 square miles, that's 33 miles on a side, would provide a source of water to this community. But that's 2,000 square miles and 3,000 feet of drawdown. I mean, it's incredible what they were doing. I calculate 30 to 70 years of supply. And what do you do? What does a town of 300,000 people do in 70 years when there's no water? Produce water from oil and gas. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I don't think it's technically possible to do this at scale. I think there's never mind the energy costs, never mind the capital costs, materials, corrosion, instrumentation and control. I don't think it's possible at scale. And then importing water from elsewhere ain't gonna work. So this is I think there are some circumstances, but it's not going to be a major source of supply. It's not going to be save the state. So let me just cut to the chase. I don't need to go through all this stuff. One of the things that I think, go back. I think that 19th century water laws constrain future water resource strategies. You know, the priority administration is really difficult to live with in the 21st century. I think ultimately we should start a dialogue on how to fairly and equitably share our water resources. And this is going to be a very, very difficult conversation because everybody's got a vested interest. You know, my somewhat cynical observation, skeptical, cynical, what's more emphatic than cynical, is everybody is in favor of water planning, but I think that so many of the people that participate in water planning say, oh, we're going to be able to convince everybody that we need more water. That's not going to happen. And that's going to be the son of a gun. That's going to be what's really difficult here. But I think, the strategies that I suggested a few minutes ago are all short-term fixes, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But ultimately, we need to have this conversation. So with that, there's my email address. I'm pleased to take questions. I've got references at the back. I sent a copy of this to Brittany It will be, I'm willing to share this presentation with anybody that wants it. And I believe that the water advocates are going to uh, post it on their website as well. So with that, thank you very much. And I'll start my share. Thanks, John. It's nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That was very informative. Um, I think there were a couple questions in the chat. I saw one specifically from LaDonna. LaDonna, do you want to ask a question to Bruce, and we can have some discussion about that? I think Elaine and you were having some discussion about that question.
Do you want me to read the chat, or are you going to do it?
I can, but if LaDonna wants to unmute and ask her question, that will work too. But
Sure.
she can't unmute. I'm going to see if I have any notice of problems. But there she is. She's unmuted. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Brittany. Thank you so much for your presentation and for highlighting different water sources and what we're facing in this water crisis here in New Mexico and some possibilities for addressing it. So rather than talking about what we're actually doing, I'd like your insight on the fact that we're having a notable decline in aquifers, as you discussed, and we have a finite source naturally of groundwater in an aquifer, and we have a sole source aquifer in eastern New Mexico. I'm sure you're familiar with. So we're using a mitigation strategy to conserve as much aquifer groundwater as possible. But I would like to hear from you regarding ceasing the OSE, Office of the State Engineer practice of approving applications that are not protested. So they're not protested to grant the drilling of supplemental water wells in designated critical management areas like our particular Curry County Basin, which is a closed basin, but also is a critical management area. This is a challenge we continue to meet with as we're trying to conserve more groundwater and keep the groundwater basically banked in the aquifer. We're still having to deal with the supplemental drilling of groundwater wells, which continues to withdraw at a rather rapid rate, 93% for irrigation in eastern New Mexico, the water that we're saving. So what are your thoughts about maybe some changes needed in that practice? I think that's what I'm trying to work through.
Yeah, and I'm not the right person to ask about those supplemental wells. I do know that on the Eastern Plains, you know, there are a lot of center pivot irrigations, and you cross the line into Texas, and you can see it on Google Earth. There tremendous number of very large irrigated fields there, and so it'd be interesting to see. We have a compact, 8 compacts, I believe, that deal with the distribution of water between surface water between states. There's nothing that deals with the distribution of groundwater between states. So I'm dodging your question because I don't know about the supplemental wells, but I think the problem is bigger than just supplemental wells. I think it extends over into farther to the east into Texas.
It does. In fact, I'm working in the Texas Panhandle as we speak. So I am working with the Texas Panhandle as well as eastern New Mexico, knowing that we are that closely connected. But this is me talking based on my research, the research that I have accessible to me regarding what's happening in these aquifer. Well, we share the same aquifer. So
yes, you do.
Yes. So it just appears to me that we can no longer sustain irrigation farming in this aquifer at the level we have been.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
But I tell you, they're going to claim, and rightfully so, that they've got senior rights. And I don't know that there is a mechanism to curtail those rights at present.
Right. But I think we're at a pivotal point. I'm just making a statement, okay? So I'm just asking It appears that we're at a pivotal point in the history of the state of New Mexico, but I'm also finding this stands true for Texas Panhandle, minimally Texas Panhandle. I'm in conversations with Kansas, Colorado, the Texas Panhandle, and what I'm finding is this does not appear to be sustainable. Now, what will we do? We're in a true water crisis in New Mexico. You've highlighted a lot of data to support that fact. And irrigation, though, for us, Texas Panhandle and Eastern New Mexico seems to be the greatest drawdown from the aquifer. It's mining it at a very rapid rate. So I'm just trying to, we have a model in place to pay irrigation farmers to retire their wells, and we're compensating them well. I just think we have to continue to consider doing that work and expanding that work in order to limit or at least decrease the irrigation farming that's occurring and help farmers transition into another way of agricultural production. I really just cannot find another way around this, and I just wondered if you could find another way around this.
No, I can't. It's just
Okay.
not sustainable. It's
Okay.
just not sustainable. And that's, one of the reasons why I suggested if we do go to some kind of a rate structure to use state's water, that perhaps they put a surcharge on people that are using water in basins with a declining water table. The one place where they have been somewhat successful in purchasing water rights is the Artesian Basin, where the Artesian Conservancy District, Artesian Basin Conservancy District, has been buying up some of the water rights to ensure delivery in the Pecos River to Texas.
Right.
Well,
I am familiar. Thank you.
There is some successful demonstration of that concept, but on the Eastern Plains, the scale is an order of magnitude bigger.
Well, I appreciate that, Bruce, because I go to bed with this every night. I get up with it in the morning. I'm just trying to figure out, it doesn't seem to be any other way around this than facing the facts and addressing where we find ourselves. I like the surcharge idea, but I truly believe, given the magnitude and severity of what we're facing in Eastern New Mexico, we're going to have to take a dramatic course forward. But thank you for what you've provided this evening.
Yeah, and I would recommend that you invest in a bulletproof vest.
Yes. No, you're right. I need to do just that. Thank you.
I hear you, Donna. The first 4 years, early in my career, I worked for the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and for 3 years I was in Lubbock, Texas, and that was 40 years ago now. But I see the only solution is to convert the southern high plains to the grassland it once was.
Yes.
And that keeps, because if you don't, it'll Hoyt Patterson was planting pecans, or he was planting some kind of shrubby bush type thing, and the whole area blew away. And,
Yes.
and you can't do that. You have to have a good ground cover to preserve. Otherwise, it'll be the 1920s, 30s stuff bowl.
Yes.
Let's go. Norm Gom has a similar question. I'll just read it if you haven't seen it in the chat. I have a similar question. The state engineer continues to permit surface to groundwater transfers, which has the effect of switching from an unreliable to supply to groundwater, which is there until we exhaust it. Do you think we need a moratorium on such transfers until we can implement a true conjunctive use stewardship program for both the river and our groundwater? And he's, of course, absolutely right. When you switch from one source to the other, there's going to be losses they talk about carriage losses or transfer losses. Yeah, and I know that the city of Santa Fe has been purchasing water, if available. And it's been fairly small quantities to date, as to the best of my understanding, but they've been purchasing water from the Middle Rio Grande and transferring the water rights for city of Santa Fe use. Although based on the talk I heard this morning, I think they're not doing that as aggressively as they used to. But the water losses are really can be in aggregate can be very large. And the idea that we need a conjunctive management model is absolutely true. The only model that I'm aware of was the ErgSim model that Jesse Roach developed at Sandia. And that's doesn't really have the resolution, the spatial resolution that you need for a management model. It's good for playing games, but yeah, the modeling is going to be very difficult to do, and tremendous amount of data is going to be required to calibrate a model like that. So I don't see it coming in the near future. Brittany, you have a comment. Why don't you, since you're online, go ahead.
I was just responding to Norm that as I understand it, the OSC lawyers are considering a process where if you want to transfer surface to ground, that they will limit that groundwater diversion to the consumptive amount that there was the historic supply that served the acequias. So as we know, the acequias are not reliable. They're getting less and less water, some as much as, 60% less than they had originally. And so the OSE would cut the consumptive use of that well down to 60% to match the acequia volume. It doesn't necessarily help with that reliable versus unreliable source piece, but it is something they're considering. There's been no decisions or policies yet. I want to be very clear on that. But I know that there have been some discussions around that consideration.
Thank you. Yeah, you're probably closer to it than I am. Other questions?
We had a good question. Stephanie Weisberg. Stephanie, do you want to unmute yourself?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Hi,
Stephanie.
Bruce.
We used to work together.
I just noticed, we lose more and more trees every year here in the East Mountains. And I read on Nextdoor, people are just telling each other, oh, you've got to water your trees in order to save them, or they're not going to get, so I think people are really, I would assume they're really using a lot of their well water out here to water their trees. And then, it's also a fire issue. So I don't know if anybody, I know Bernalillo County has a program of monitoring some wells, but I don't know if anyone's looked at this holistically.
I don't know either. Yes, Bernalillo County does have a groundwater hydrologist, and he does monitor a number of the wells. So much of the East Mountains, and I don't know exactly where you live, but a lot of the East Mountains receives water from Entrenosa, which is taking water from way out in the middle of the Estancia Basin. So, and in the East Mountains, and nobody knows this better than John Hawley because he was here when the basin was laid down. That's real hit or miss. It's this jumbled mix of sandstones, limestones, alluvial formations, just a little bit of everything. And I don't know that you can, in that particular part of the county, if you can actually look at a global global decline, because you'll have one well that's a marvelous well, and 100 yards away, there's one that's totally dry. My skepticism is that it depends on how close they are to the nearest septic tank, but.
We're in Tijeras, and I think we don't actually have an aquifer under us, but we get water from this, the Santa Fe Basin and one other one.
Yeah.
And my well's 500 feet.
Yeah. It's tough out there. Someone has their hand up.
Kathleen, will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. So, listening to your talk, which was very interesting, it shocked me that we allocated water for agriculture in, I think, 1907 for agriculture, before we were even a state.
Yeah.
And I mean, I conserve water. I was shocked when you said municipalities only use 10% of the water or water. 50% goes to agriculture, which benefits a very few population. I mean, very rich farmers. So to me, we've got to change. We've got to redesign the law, and it's going to be messy. People are going to be pissed, the big businesses. But to me, that seems to be the only way to solve this problem, to stop, agricultural use of water for alfalfa fields, for 4 cuts of alfalfa fields. And we can't get rid of the green chili, but it seems like that is the major use of water, and it goes to only a minor, small percentage of the population.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said. At the same time, it's in the Constitution that prior appropriation, the oldest right, has the best, has first choice or first opportunity to use all this water. And
Well, I think we need
who
to
has, think about this, who has the political clout in the state legislature? Urban dwellers? So
Right.
it's not
So
gonna,
I just think we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and do the nasty hard work and get our bulletproof vests on and change the Constitution, put an amendment in the Constitution. It might have to get to that point where, well, it's going to have to get to that point.
I don't know. The ag industry argues, and it's a really good point, and that is that it's more than just, agriculture is more than just the economic benefit of the crops they grow, but it's part of the culture of the West. We've for 150 years, New Mexico, part of our identity is, the rural communities. It's the benefits of the green belt in the inner valley that all the little farms do, and the big farms down towards Socorro and Sierra counties. There's a cultural aspect, there's a historic aspect, there's social aspect.
Yeah, but they weren't using center pivot irrigation to water huge alfalfa fields. I just think that's kind of a cop-out answer. I'm not blaming you, but we've got to have a paradigm shift of what's important in this state. What is our main economic beneficial use of water? And it's the agriculture only benefits a very small percentage of the people.
Yeah.
So I think your point is definitely well taken, Kathleen, and I would highly encourage you to join the process that the ISC has for regional planning, because I think that it's important to have diverse perspectives. And that's a really good place where you can voice some of these concerns and get involved in that planning process for the
Okay, so can I join it by, how do I join that? I'm a member of this group.
I'll be posting a link in the chat in a little while that will take you to an online survey that you can do to help give them some data. But to feed off of your question and what Bruce said, that it's in the Constitution, one thing that, I have some heartburn around, you had this fabulous, how great we can do at conserving water, and yet our Constitution says that our water is a water right is the continuous beneficial use of water. And so how do we pair conservation with this continuous beneficial use ideal that people have this lose it or use it mentality. And so they use it when they don't really need it for fear of losing it, especially as the state starts to implement more abandonment procedures. So, do you see that as something that we can change over time to find some sort of protections for people who are willing to conserve their water and not lose it based on that constitutional continuous beneficial use statement?
Yeah, I think that's where we need to go, is that, and I mentioned it earlier, that if a farmer conserves water and sells the amount that he's conserved for another use, he needs to retain his water rights. And that is going to require some legislation. Right now, I think it's been done. This is my understanding, and there may be people that know better than I do. It's been sort of on an ad hoc basis. There's temporary leases and things like that. But the farmer needs to, the agricultural interest, he needs to be assured that he's not going to lose his right, because that is a valuable commodity, and his well-being, his economics, the interest he's paying on his loans, everything is based on the value of that water.
Thank you, Bruce. So I think we have time for one question. Betsy, Betsy, do you want to unmute and ask your question quickly?
Okay, I wondered what amount of water is being bought up to sell at the best price. Clearly, there's bottling of water in the Los Lunas area in Valencia County for bottling it, and I have seen reports on PBS about Wall Street buying up farm water rights and holding them, leasing the land to the farmers in the meantime, but holding it until the price is right. Is any of that going on in New Mexico?
I don't know. And I've seen the newspaper reports about that water bottling plant in Los Lunas. I don't know what their total volume is, and I suspect, in comparison to the amount that's used for the city proper, I suspect it's small, but I don't know. And I've seen the reports about large investors, and they talk about Wall Street, but they also talk about Asians, Japanese, and the Chinese buying water rights or buying land in Arizona, especially, and using that to grow forage for their cattle. I have relatives in Idaho, and I was up there, family reunion a month ago, and all these wheat fields that used to, I mean, last time I was there 3 years ago, they were all wheat fields, and now they're hay fields. They got giant stacks of hay, and I asked them, what are they doing? They're taking all that hay, they're pelletizing it and shipping it to Japan. So I mean, this water thing is an international issue. There's a lot of embedded water in a ton of hay, and I calculated one time. I also have relatives in Durango, and I was driving up there, and I calculated, or I counted, in the 2 hours driving up 550 from Bernalillo to Durango, there were 6 big semi trucks going south loaded with hay. And I calculated that during the growing season, when they're shipping that hay south, that the embedded water constitutes the second biggest river in New Mexico. All the embedded water in that hay moving to the dairies in eastern New Mexico is equivalent to the second biggest river in the state.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks, Betsy. So we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for your presentation, Bruce. as we have said, we will definitely be posting the recording and the PowerPoint. And if you all have any follow-up questions that you think of later, please feel free to let us know, and we will try to get some answers for you. And I just have a couple of closing slides for us. As I described to Kathleen, one of our do your part action items this month is to take the ISC online survey about regional planning. This is the implementation of the Water Planning Security Act. This is step one in a long process to develop the rules and regulations that will go into how the regions will set up their planning entities, prepare those plans, and implement those plans. And that implementation piece is critical. And so I posted a link in the chat of where you can go to take that survey. Please note that survey ends on Monday. That's your deadline, Monday. So you must do it this weekend if you want your voice to be heard. The ISC had some fabulous open houses where they collected some of the same data, but you can do all of that online at the link that I showed you. And just another quick note, it is a lot of information. So don't think this is a survey you're going to be taking in 2 minutes. It provides a lot of background information about what the regions currently are, what they could be. So please take some time to read those. I think it gives some really great foundational information. So even if you did attend the open house and you have some follow-up information that you want to provide to the ISC, they have no qualms with people providing multiple inputs from multiple open houses or multiple times on the survey. So give as much information as you want to the ISC, and they will incorporate that into the reports that they're going to be preparing as part of this process to start, drafting these rules and regulations. The second action item that we have for you today is we would really love for you to contact your legislator. There's a national meeting, which is going to be happening on August 26th and 27th. And the Legislative Finance Committee Water Subcommittee will be meeting in mid-September, the 16th, or no, 17th, 18th, or 19th. We don't know which of those days yet. But please request that your legislator prioritize water stewardship in all of their actions for this interim session and going into the 2025 session. It's really critical that we put water first. We're in a crisis, and it's time to really act like we're in a crisis and come together to work to find solutions. Next month, we have a fabulous workshop that we're going to hold for you. Stephanie, I think some of your questions might be answered about whether climate change is being studied in specific areas and how people are reacting to climate change and what that looks like. David Gutzler and David Dubois will be presenting on their ridification of New Mexico. So we really hope you can join us. And give me 1 second and I will post that link for registering for that meeting in the chat. I apologize, I am not the best multitasker, so give me just 1 moment if you would, please. Hopefully you can just read the flyer while I'm giving you that link. So please feel free to register there, and it will remind you later when it gets closer. You'll see some emails to us about this meeting. The following meetings that we have in October and November are going to be Stacey Timmons, my apologies, will be presenting on the Aquifer Research and Monitoring Program and the implementation of the Water Data Security Act. These are 2 programs that are the legislature has approved these programs, but they don't adequately fund. And so none of the state agencies have the staffing or funding necessary to implement either of these projects. And both of these projects are critical and foundational to water planning. Without the data, we won't have any idea of where we're going. We really need this data to understand where we are so that we know where we can go and what we need to do to get there. And then in November, this is going to be our, great hurrah meeting of what we're going to do to ask the legislature to do for us in 2025. So please come to that meeting and we will give you the details of what types of things to ask your legislators for, and what kind of lobbying we'd like to have happen at that session. And then in December, we always take a break because it's busy in December and nobody has time for meetings. So I wanted to also take a moment to thank our wonderful sponsors. Thank you so much to Amigos Bravos, the League of Women Voters, 350 New Mexico, Interfaith Power and Light, and New Mexico Wild. We couldn't do it without you. We really appreciate your sponsorship. And then finally, if you enjoy these presentations and you'd like to donate to the Water Advocates, we would never say no to your donations. And if you don't have the money to donate, but you want to volunteer with us, we would love your volunteer. We're still looking for somebody to help us with our newsletter. So if that's something that you would like to do, please let us know and get you scheduled. We also have many other volunteer opportunities as well. So if there's something that you want to do, I'm sure we can find a space for you to do. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you in September.
And Bruce, I just want to say thank you so much for two exceptionally informative presentations.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you for inviting me.
Edna, did you have a question that we might answer? You're muted.
Still muted. I think you can hold down your space bar to temporarily unmute yourself. Oh, we cannot hear you. Maybe post your question in the chat and we can answer it that way. Just going to keep the meeting open for a few more moments to see if we can get that question either in the chat or elsewhere, and then I'll close out.
Good. Have a good evening, everybody.
And then Norm posted his email in the chat for you if you want to email him your question. So if you can still see the chat, that's great. Otherwise, it's normgong@gmail.com.
Good night.
Hi, everyone.